The great hall of the Virene fortress shimmered with cold blue light. The walls were carved from the ice of the moon Varkesh, a place where even sound felt frozen. Soldiers in silver armor stood like statues on each side, their eyes sharp and emotionless. The air itself was so cold that every breath turned to mist. At the far end of the hall stood Princess Tashira Virene, heir to the Virene Empire and commander of the Ice Legions. Her armor was made of shining crystal plates, etched with gold and powered by living energy cells. She stood tall and proud, her face calm but her tone sharp. Around her, alien nobles murmured softly as a group of guests entered. They were humans, 5 of them. They wore heavy gear made from gray metal and dark fabric, simple and practical. No glowing lights, no elegant design, just solid pieces meant for protection and warmth. The Virene soldiers exchanged amused looks, and laughter rippled quietly across the hall. At the front of the human group stood Sergeant Daniel Ward. He wasn't tall by Virene standards, nor did he look particularly strong. His face was weathered, his hair short and his eyes a steady brown that seemed unimpressed by the grand hall. He moved with calm confidence, carrying his helmet under one arm. When Tashira saw him, a faint smile touched her lips, half amusement, half disbelief. "So," she said, her voice echoing softly through the icy air, "this is the human warrior the Federation sent to represent their kind?" Her words were smooth, but her tone carried a sting. The nobles around her chuckled quietly. Daniel gave a short, respectful nod. "Yes, Your Highness," he replied. "Sergeant Daniel Ward, Earth Defense Force." Tashira walked down from her throne, her steps light and graceful. She circled Daniel slowly, examining his armor with the curiosity one gives to an old relic. "Your gear," she said, touching the metal plate on his shoulder, "is primitive. It looks like it belongs to an age long before space travel. No adaptive shielding, no neural weave. Just steel?" Her voice dripped with amusement. Daniel's lips curved slightly.
"Titanium alloy."
"Strong enough for most jobs." Tashira raised an eyebrow. "And your species believes this is enough to face war?" He met her gaze steadily. "It's not the metal that wins the war, Your Highness. It's the person wearing it." The room went silent. For a brief second, her eyes narrowed. Then she laughed softly, the sound clear and bright like breaking glass. "You have courage, human," she said, stepping back. "Or perhaps you simply don't understand where you stand. This is the fortress of the Ice Legions, home to the greatest warriors of the Virene Empire. You come here with iron and cloth and you speak of victory." Daniel didn't move. "I come here to serve peace. But if war finds me, I'll do what humans always do." "And what is that?" she asked. "Adapt," he said simply. There was something about the way he said it, quiet, calm, without challenge, that made her pause. For just a heartbeat, her laughter stopped. But pride was part of her nature, and she brushed off the strange feeling quickly. She turned to the gathered soldiers. "Our Federation friends wish to learn about survival on Varkesh. They claim their kind is capable of enduring any world." A soldier near her smirked. "Let us see if their claim holds true, Princess." Tashira's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Indeed, Sergeant Ward, you will join us in a trial tomorrow. A test of endurance under the open sky of Varkesh. You will face one night outside the fortress. No shelter. No heat field. Survive until dawn and you will earn my respect." The human delegation shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "The temperature drops to minus 180 degrees, sir." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Accepted," he said. Tashira tilted her head slightly, surprised by the lack of argument. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Sometimes," Daniel said, putting his helmet back on. "It's the same thing." The Virene laughed again, but the princess's smile faded more slowly this time. There was something about his calmness that felt different. Most beings trembled before her. This one did not. That night, in her private chamber, Tashira stood before a window of transparent ice. Outside, the endless white wasteland stretched to the horizon. Storms of frost moved like living clouds. The temperature sensors read 182 degrees. Even her own species, evolved for cold, could not survive long without their suits. She thought of the human's expression, steady, without arrogance, without fear. Why had it unsettled her? Her personal advisor, a tall Virene named Koresh, entered quietly. "Your Highness," he said, "it may not be wise to let the human face the trial. If he dies, the Federation might see it as an insult." Tashira didn't look away from the window. Then let him prove his words. If humans wish to stand among the great empires, they must face what we face. Koresh hesitated. You don't think he can survive? No one can, she said simply. Not without our technology. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about his calm voice. It's not the metal that wins the war. It's the person wearing it. The next day, a small crowd gathered on the fortress platform. The wind howled, carrying fine ice that cut against exposed skin. The alien nobles stood behind shimmering energy shields wrapped in layers of glowing armor. Daniel stood apart from them, checking the seals on his suit. It looked old compared to the sleek designs of the Vereen, but every part was practical. He attached the oxygen pack, secured the heating core, and closed the helmet with a faint hiss. Tashira stepped forward. You understand the terms, human? I do, he said. No aid, no shelter, she continued. Survive until the star rises, he nodded. Understood. The wind tore across the ice. For a moment she thought he might hesitate. Instead, he stepped forward and began walking into the white storm. The crowd murmured softly, expecting him to return within minutes. Tashira watched as his figure grew smaller and smaller, until the storm swallowed him completely. Hours passed. The sensors tracked the temperature dropping lower and lower. Visibility was near zero. The Vereen officers monitored his vitals remotely, shaking their heads. His heart rate is steady, one said in disbelief. Impossible, another muttered. At that temperature, even our blood would begin to freeze without protection. Tashira said nothing. She stood near the observation window, eyes fixed on the icy horizon. Time passed slowly. The wind never stopped screaming. When midnight came, the others left. She stayed. Her reflection in the ice looked tired, uncertain. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter. He was just another arrogant alien trying to prove something, yet her heart felt heavy. Why? Because deep inside she wanted him to come back. At last, the faint light of dawn broke over the horizon. The wind began to calm and the sensors picked up movement. A small dot appeared in the white field, growing larger and clearer. It was him. Daniel walked through the snow, slow but steady. His armor was coated in frost, every joint stiff, but his steps did not falter. When he reached the gate, he gave a simple nod. Still operational, he said through his comm. The guards stared. Tashira stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. How? She whispered. He opened his helmet, letting out a puff of warm breath. Good gear, he said simply. And good training. Then he added with a faint smile. Told you, it's enough to do the job. For the first time in her life, Princess Tashira Vereen, the pride of the Ice Empire, had no reply. Her laughter, once sharp and sure, died quietly in the cold morning air. The sun on Varkesh was weak and distant, more like a pale circle than a real star. It gave no warmth, only light that bounced off the endless white fields. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the world silent. Every surface glittered with crystals of frost. Inside the fortress, the great hall was quieter than usual. The Vereen soldiers spoke in low voices, glancing toward the observation window again and again. They still could not believe what they had seen that morning. The human had returned alive. Princess Tashira Vereen stood at the center of the hall, her thoughts heavy and unsettled. She had expected to celebrate his failure, to prove her empire's superiority once again. Instead, she found herself thinking of the human's calm face, his steady breath and his words. It's enough to do the job. She hated how those words stayed in her mind. Her advisor, Koresh, entered quietly. Your Highness, he said, bowing slightly. The human requests an audience. Tashira turned sharply. He does? Yes, he says he has a report to deliver. She hesitated, then nodded. Bring him in. Moments later, the great doors opened and Sergeant Daniel Ward stepped into the hall. His armor was still scratched and worn, but cleaned of frost. His movements were slower than before, showing the exhaustion of the long, frozen night. Yet he stood straight, his eyes calm as ever. Tashira looked at him silently. Around her, the nobles whispered among themselves. To them, he was a curiosity, a small, warm-blooded creature who had done something impossible. You survived, Tashira said finally. No Vereen expected that. Daniel gave a short nod. It was cold, he said simply. But I've trained in worse. Worse? One of the soldiers repeated, almost laughing. No world is colder than Varkesh. Daniel's gaze turned to him. Ever been to Europa's shadow trenches? or the Antarctic winter back on Earth. We learned to survive the impossible long before we reached the stars. His tone wasn't proud, it was factual, calm, steady. Somehow that made his words stronger. The soldier fell silent. Tashira crossed her arms. You risked your life for pride, human. For what reason? Daniel looked at her. Not pride. You gave me a challenge, I took it. Sometimes the best way to understand others is to walk through their storm. Her expression softened slightly, though she tried to hide it. And what did you understand? That your world is beautiful, he said. Deadly, but beautiful. The words were simple, but they struck her strangely. For all her life, she had seen Varkesh only as a place of testing, a field of trials, not beauty. Yet here was a man from a warm world, calling her frozen home beautiful. She didn't know how to reply. Later that day, Daniel stood outside on the fortress balcony. The wind was calmer, the air still freezing, but he seemed to enjoy looking out at the endless snow. His breath fogged up inside his helmet as he spoke into his recorder. Mission log, he said quietly. Endured one Virine night. Body temperature dropped to critical for 3 hours, but systems held. Still operational. Locals, surprised. Might open new communication paths. He stopped, looking toward the horizon. The white world stretched forever, but he didn't feel alone. There was something peaceful about its silence, like the quiet after a battle. Behind him, the door opened. Tashira stepped out, wrapped in her shimmering armor. She walked beside him without a word, her eyes on the same horizon. You still function after last night, she said softly. Your body is fragile, but your spirit is not. Daniel smiled faintly. Humans are used to fragile things. We learned to protect them. That's how we got this far. Tashira tilted her head slightly. You speak of your species as if weakness is your strength. Maybe it is, he said. We get hurt, we fail. But we keep trying. That's what makes us human. For a long moment, they stood in silence. The cold wind brushed against them, and tiny crystals of frost formed on their armor. Finally, she turned toward him. You truly believe your people can match the Virine in strength? Daniel looked back at her, calm as ever. Not in strength, he said, but maybe in endurance. We don't break easily. She studied his face carefully, trying to understand what kind of creature could speak with such certainty after facing death. There was no arrogance in him, only quiet faith. That evening, the fortress hosted a small gathering of officers. The Virine soldiers shared drinks made from frozen minerals and glowing fruit extracts. Daniel joined them, though his presence still drew curious looks. One young warrior, bold and a little drunk, leaned toward him. Tell us, human, he said with a smirk. Do all of your kind wear such old-fashioned armor? Daniel chuckled lightly. Only the ones who expect trouble, the warrior grinned. Maybe your kind should learn to use real armor. Ours can stop plasma fire. Daniel took a slow sip of his water before answering. And yet your people still lose wars, don't they? The table went silent. Then the warrior laughed loudly. You have sharp words for someone so small. Daniel smiled back. Sharp enough to make you think. Tashira watched from across the hall. She expected anger or a fight, but instead the Virine soldier nodded, clapping Daniel on the shoulder with a grin. You're bold, human. I'll give you that. The tension broke into laughter. Even Tashira allowed a small smile. Somehow the human had turned mockery into respect, without force, without pride. Later that night, Tashira met Daniel again in the command chamber. The walls hummed with power, glowing softly with blue veins of energy. She stood by a large table displaying the frozen landscape in holographic form. You handled my soldiers well, she said. They're good people, Daniel replied. Tough. Reminds me of some units I served with. Tashira looked at him thoughtfully. You've seen battle? Many, he said. Too many. There was something quiet in his voice, something that carried weight. She sensed that behind his calm eyes lived memories of war, pain, and endurance that words could not express. He pointed at the holographic map. These coordinates, Ice Trench 42. There's movement there. Tashira frowned. You noticed that? Thermal patterns are regular, he said. Could be a malfunction. Or something under the surface. She leaned closer to check. You're right. That trench was supposed to be stable. Daniel gave a small nod. We should check it. Sometimes small signs warn of big trouble. Her respect for him grew silently. He wasn't just strong, he was observant, trained, and thoughtful. Hours later, alarms echoed through the fortress. The ground trembled slightly. A voice shouted through the intercom. Avalanche movement detected in Trench 42. Rescue units needed. Tashira reacted instantly, giving orders. But before she could assign teams, Daniel was already moving. He grabbed his helmet, sealed it, and sprinted toward the exit. Human, she called after him. You're not authorized to... But he was gone. Outside, the wind was fierce again. The night had returned with all its icy wrath. Daniel pushed through the storm, guided by the blinking beacons of distress. Several Vereen soldiers were trapped under collapsing ice layers. He used his scanner and bare strength to pull them free one by one. Inside the fortress, Tashira watched the feed from his helmet camera. His oxygen was dropping, his suit temperature nearing failure, but he kept going. He'll die out there, Koresh said. Tashira's fists clenched. No, he won't. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, the signal stabilized. Daniel emerged from the storm, dragging 2 wounded soldiers behind him. When the gate opened, he stumbled in, exhausted but alive. The soldiers he saved saluted him weakly. Thank you. Human, one of them said. Daniel nodded tiredly. Just doing the job. Tashira stepped forward. For once, she didn't have a proud expression. She looked at him with something new in her eyes, something like respect and something deeper. You saved them, she said softly. He shrugged. Didn't think about it. Just moved. You risked your life for my soldiers, she said. They were in danger, he replied simply. That's reason enough. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because in that moment, watching him breathe heavily under the weight of his frozen armor, Princess Tashira realized something she had never believed possible. The fragile human was stronger than she thought, not because of his gear, but because of his heart. The next morning, the fortress buzzed with quiet excitement. The story of the human soldier's endurance had spread across every hall and corridor. Warriors who once laughed at him now spoke his name with a mix of disbelief and respect. Some called him the Warm One. Others whispered, the survivor of the storm. But one voice stayed. Silent Princess Tashira Vereen. She had seen many warriors in her life. She had seen soldiers with cybernetic bodies, energy shields, and enhanced reflexes, yet none of them had stood calmly in a death storm with nothing but outdated armor and sheer will. It unsettled her. Not because she doubted her people's strength, but because she had witnessed something her mind could not easily explain. Something human. When she entered the command hall that day, she found Sergeant Daniel Ward already there, standing before a projection of the ice fields. He was studying the map again, focused as always. She watched him quietly for a moment before speaking. You work even when not ordered to? Daniel looked up. Habit, he said. Idle hands make slow soldiers. Her lips curved slightly. A strange philosophy. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but it keeps me alive. She walked closer, her boots clicking on the frozen floor. You are a curious being, human. You survive a night no Vereen expected you to. You rescue my soldiers without orders, yet you do not boast. Are you not proud of what you've done? Daniel met her gaze. Pride doesn't help much in a storm, Your Highness. It just makes you stop listening to the wind. His words carried a quiet strength that made her pause again. She had been raised to see her empire as perfect, her people as the peak of creation. Yet here was a simple human reminding her that humility could be strength too. But the Vereen Council did not share her growing respect. That evening, the high nobles gathered in the frost chamber. Tall, elegant beings wearing flowing robes of silver. Their eyes glowed faintly with cold light as they spoke in low tones. The human's presence is a distraction, one said. He survived by chance, nothing more. Another replied, he makes the soldiers question our superiority. That cannot be allowed. Tashira listened silently, her jaw tight. One noble turned toward her. Princess, we request you prove the weakness of this creature. Expose his tricks before the army. Show that his survival was no miracle. She could have refused, but part of her wanted to know the truth as well. Finally, she said, very well. Tomorrow he will show us what lies beneath his so-called strength. The next day, the training hall was filled with soldiers. The icy walls echoed with murmurs as Daniel entered, wearing his usual armor. He looked calm, though he could sense something different in the air, something expectant. At the far end of the hall, Tashira stood on a raised platform. Her voice carried clearly across the room. Sergeant Ward, she said, our people are curious. We have seen what your gear can do. But we wish to know, what is your true strength? Is it the armor you wear? The tools you use? Or something else? Daniel gave a small nod. You want to see what's underneath? Her expression was unreadable. Yes, remove your gear, human. Show us the truth. The soldiers stirred, whispering among themselves. Some smiled, expecting to see weakness. Others remained silent, waiting. Daniel stood still for a moment, then nodded again. All right. He reached up and unsealed the clamps on his helmet. With a soft hiss, the faceplate lifted. Cold air rushed in, but he didn't flinch. He set the helmet down carefully, then began removing the outer armor plates one piece at a time. The room was silent except for the sound of metal striking the floor. Beneath the outer layers, he wore a thin thermal suit, scarred, patched, and dark from long use. As he peeled off the chest plate, the soldier saw the scars underneath. Not mechanical augmentations, not alien technology, just skin, marked by burns, cuts, and healed wounds that told a story no machine could erase. Tashira stared, her golden eyes wide. She had expected to see hidden energy fields, internal heat generators, or implants. Instead, she saw a body built on endurance, not perfection. Those marks, she said quietly. Daniel looked down at the faint white lines across his chest and arms. Old memories, he said. From training, battles, accidents. Life. A soldier near the front frowned. You survived those without reconstruction? Daniel nodded. Doctors helped. But humans heal slow. We just keep going. Tashira stepped closer, her voice lower now. Your armor is nothing compared to ours. Your body, weak, scarred, fragile. How did you survive that storm then? Tell me, human, what kept you alive? He looked straight into her eyes. Will. The single word cut through the silence like a blade. He continued, his voice calm but strong. When the wind tried to bury me, I remembered what I was trained for. We humans live on a world full of fire, storms, and chaos. Our ancestors faced everything with almost nothing. They built homes in deserts, sailed through storms, crossed oceans with no guarantee of return. We don't wait for the world to be kind. We learn to survive it. His words carried power, not the power of weapons, but of truth. The soldiers who once mocked him now stood silent. Even the nobles, cold and proud, shifted uneasily. Tashira's eyes softened. You speak of struggle as if it is sacred. For us, Daniel said, it is. A long silence followed. The air in the hall felt heavy, but not cold anymore. The princess looked at the armor pieces scattered on the floor, then back at the man standing unguarded before her. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as a primitive, not as an inferior being, but as a warrior of a different kind, one who carried his strength inside, not outside. Your kind, she said slowly, is strange. Daniel smiled faintly. We get that a lot. The crowd began to disperse, still whispering. But the tone had changed. There was no laughter this time, only quiet respect. Later, when the hall was empty, Tashira remained alone. She stood beside the discarded armor, her hand brushing one of the cold plates. Her advisor, Koresh, entered quietly. You proved your point, princess, he said. The human strength comes from spirit, not skill. She turned toward him. You are wrong, Koresh. His skill is survival. His spirit gives it meaning. Koresh frowned. You speak of him as if he were an equal. She looked out through the ice window at the pale sky. Perhaps he is. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his quarters, sitting quietly at the edge of his bunk. He felt tired, but not from the cold or the attention. He had seen that look before. The moment when someone realized humans were not what they expected. He took out a small metal tag from his pocket, his old unit tag from Earth. The edges were worn, smooth from years of handling. Still doing the job, he murmured to himself with a small smile. That night, Tashira couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the scars on his skin, the calm in his eyes, and the word he had spoken, will. Her people had built their strength through science and technology. Yet here was a being who carried his power within himself. For the first time, she wondered if true strength wasn't in perfection, but in imperfection, and the will to rise beyond it. The next morning, as the fortress prepared for another day, Tashira gave a new order. All soldiers, she said, will attend human-style endurance drills. We will learn from the one who survived the storm. The officers exchanged surprised looks. Koresh asked carefully, You mean from Sergeant Ward? She nodded. Yes, from him. And as she walked toward the training fields, she found herself smiling faintly, not out of arrogance, but out of quiet admiration, because somewhere in her heart, she knew the truth. The human had stripped away more than his armor. He had stripped away her doubt. The winds of Varkesh had settled into a bitter calm, but the ice world remained deadly. Outside the fortress, the endless white fields stretched to the horizon, unbroken except for the occasional jagged cliffs and frozen ravines. The sun hovered low, a pale disk in the sky, casting long shadows that crept like silent predators. Inside the fortress, the soldiers buzzed with a new energy. The human, Sergeant Daniel Ward, had become the center of conversation. No longer the subject of ridicule, he had earned a rare title among the Vereen, the Endurer. Princess Tashira Vereen walked through the halls, her mind restless. She could no longer ignore the truth that had been growing quietly inside her. Humans were strange, yes, but strangely remarkable. One human in particular had shown her something that no amount of Vereen training or technology could replicate: unyielding will. The day began with training exercises unlike any the Vereen had seen before. Daniel had suggested human-style endurance drills, which involved simple, exhausting tasks: running across uneven ice, lifting heavy weights, and navigating treacherous terrain without assistance. The soldiers grumbled at first. Some muttered that humans were weak. Others questioned why a primitive creature should instruct elite Vereen warriors. But Tashira stood at the front, her gaze steady, and commanded silence. Daniel moved among the soldiers, demonstrating each task with calm precision. He ran across the jagged ice, showing how to maintain balance, then lifted a weighted crate effortlessly and passed it to a struggling warrior. Not about strength, he explained. About control. About using what you have without fear. The soldiers watched him closely. Many tried to follow his techniques. Some failed, slipping and falling into the frost. But Daniel helped them up, not with pity, but with quiet encouragement. By the end of the day, even the most skeptical warriors had learned something new. They began whispering among themselves, not about his foreignness, but about his methods. Tashira observed in silence, her mind turning over a thought she had never admitted before. Perhaps humans do have a kind of strength that Vereen cannot measure. Later that evening, the fortress's emergency alarms blared. A sudden avalanche had struck one of the outlying observation posts, burying the soldiers stationed there. The sensors showed distress signals flickering weakly under layers of ice. The council panicked. Orders were shouted, energy shields activated, and rescue drones prepared for deployment. Yet in the midst of the chaos, Daniel was already moving. "Wait," Tashira said sharply. "You cannot go." But he had already suited up, stepping past guards without hesitation. His calm demeanor was unnerving amid the frantic crowd. "I've done it before," he said. "I can do it again." Tashira hesitated. She wanted to stop him, not because she feared for him, but because she knew the conditions were deadly. Yet a small, stubborn part of her trusted his judgment. "Go," she said finally, "but bring them back." The wind outside tore through the night like a living predator. Daniel moved quickly, guided by the faint beacons of the buried soldiers. His armor was simple, worn, and battered, yet he moved with precise control. Every step, every movement was calculated to preserve energy and withstand the cold. The first soldier was trapped under a thick slab of ice. Daniel scanned the area with his visor, then positioned a lever under the edge. With slow, steady pressure, he lifted the ice enough for the soldier to escape. "Stay calm," he said, his voice muffled through the helmet comm. "I've got you." The soldier's eyes widened. You didn't even flinch?" Daniel shook his head. "Not my first storm. Keep moving." Another soldier appeared, buried knee-deep. Daniel knelt beside her, cutting the ice carefully, then helping her out. The Vereen warrior looked at him in disbelief. "You are human?" she whispered. "Yes," he said simply, "and alive. Just like you will be." Hours passed. The storm grew harsher, and Daniel's suit temperature dipped dangerously. Yet he never hesitated. He worked tirelessly, moving from one trapped soldier to another using only basic tools and his knowledge of endurance tactics. Finally, the last soldier was free. Daniel checked the group's vital signs, then guided them back to the fortress. Their bodies were exhausted, their movements slow, but all of them were alive. When they reached the gates, Tashira and Koresh were waiting. Tashira's expression was unreadable at first, but her eyes glimmered with something like awe. Daniel staggered to the gate, supporting one of the soldiers. "All here," he said simply. The soldiers he saved looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you, human," one of them whispered. Daniel gave a small nod. "Just doing the job." Inside the fortress, Tashira motioned him to stand before the council. For the first time, the high nobles were silent. They had seen what they had dismissed as impossible, a human risking himself to save Vereen soldiers, and succeeding. One of the council members spoke. "This creature has shown courage beyond reason." Tashira's gaze swept the room. "Not beyond reason," she said softly. "Beyond expectation. Beyond what we believed possible," the nobles murmured, but Tashira raised her hand for silence. "Humans are fragile, yes. Their armor is simple. Their bodies are weak by our standards. But their strength lies in willpower, in endurance, in the refusal to surrender to fear." All eyes turned to Daniel. He stood quietly, not seeking praise, not demanding respect. Yet it was clear that he had earned it. Tashira continued, her voice growing firmer. "We laughed at this human's gear. We did not see the fire beneath it. His courage, his determination, his heart. These are weapons stronger than anything we possess." In the following days, Daniel's presence changed the fortress. Soldiers who had once mocked him now followed his instructions eagerly. Even the elite ice legions practiced human-style endurance exercises. Tashira often watched him train. She saw how he moved, how he pushed himself without complaint, and how he encouraged others without arrogance. She realized that leadership was not about dominance or power, it was about example. One evening, as the sun hovered pale and low, she approached him in the training yard. The ground was covered in frost, and the air smelled faintly of metal and snow. "You have changed my soldiers," she said. Daniel looked at her, breathing steadily. "Not changed. Showed them what they already have. Everyone has strength inside. Sometimes it just needs to be awakened." Tashira nodded slowly. "I see that now. And I see something else. I see a being who thrives where others fail. Not because of tools, not because of training, but because of spirit." He shrugged faintly. "We humans adapt, we endure. That's what we do." Her gaze softened, and she allowed herself a rare, honest smile. "Perhaps your people are not as weak as I once thought." Daniel smiled faintly, then looked toward the horizon. "We are not perfect," he said, "but we try. That is enough." Later that night, the fortress was quiet. Tashira stood at the observation window, looking out at the frozen world. She thought of Daniel and the soldiers he had saved. She thought of the whispers in the halls, of the awe in the council's eyes, and of the fire she now saw burning in her own chest. For the first time, she realized that humans, so small, so fragile by her standards, possessed a courage that could not be measured by armor, weapons, or shields. It was something deeper, something eternal, something that made them, in their own way, stronger than most empires could ever understand. And she knew quietly that this human, this one soldier, had not just survived the storm. He had survived her doubt, and perhaps in the process he had awakened something in her as well. The pale sun barely rose above the horizon of Varkesh, casting a silver glow over the frozen landscape. The wind howled through jagged ice cliffs, carrying the scent of snow and frost. Despite the beauty of the world, an uneasy tension filled the air. A rival alien faction, the Dralak, had been spotted approaching the fortress. Their ships glimmered faintly against the horizon, silent and deadly. The Vereen Council convened immediately, their eyes sharp and filled with worry. This attack was unexpected, and their defenses were stretched thin. Princess Tashira Vereen stood at the center of the command room, scanning the holographic map. "Their fleet is larger than we anticipated," she said. "If we engage unprepared, we will lose many lives." Her officers murmured among themselves, some already calculating retreat plans. But one figure remained calm, Sergeant Daniel Ward. Tashira turned to him. "Your people have no experience fighting our enemies. Why are you not afraid?" Daniel's steady eyes met hers. "Fear doesn't help," he said simply. "Focus does. We do what we can, not what we fear." His words carried a quiet confidence that seemed to calm the room. The soldiers listened, unconsciously straightening their backs. Even Tashira felt a spark of reassurance. The Dralak ships landed near the fortress's edge, their engines whispering threats over the ice. The first wave of drones scoured the landscape, attempting to breach the defenses. The Vereen soldiers readied their weapons, but Daniel was already moving. Without waiting for orders, he began organizing small teams of soldiers, showing them how to use the terrain to their advantage. Don't face them head-on, he instructed. Use cover, keep low, focus on one target at a time. The soldiers followed, some hesitantly but all inspired by his calm command. Daniel's simple human strategies, born from countless earthly battles, worked in ways the Vereen had not considered. Tashira watched him lead, noting how he combined observation, courage, and precision. He was not the strongest soldier in the room, nor the fastest. Yet his decisions, his timing, and his spirit made him seem unstoppable. The first clash came quickly. Dralak drones swooped toward the fortress, firing beams that sliced through ice and metal. The Vereen soldiers fired back, but their superior technology alone could not stop the relentless waves. Daniel moved among them, dodging energy blasts and helping fallen soldiers to safety. He organized small flanking teams, teaching them to strike where the drones were vulnerable. One by one, the drones fell, not to superior weapons but to clever tactics and steady aim. Tashira could hardly believe her eyes. Her soldiers had trained for centuries, using the most advanced technology the galaxy had to offer. Yet it was this human, armed only with his worn rifle and his calm mind, who turned the tide. At one point, a drone targeted her personally, streaking toward the observation platform. Daniel reacted instantly. He ran forward, leaping onto a ridge of ice, and fired a precise shot that disabled the drone just before it could reach her. For the first time in her life, Tashira realized she had been wrong to doubt him. This human was more than a survivor. He was a hero. Hours passed. The Dralak attacks continued, but the tide was shifting. Daniel coordinated defenses, saved soldiers in peril, and never once faltered. Even when his suit took damage and his rifle overheated, he adapted, using alternative tactics and improvisation. The Vereen soldiers whispered among themselves, amazed. "How can one human move like this?" one asked. Another replied, "Not just move, lead. He's like a storm of fire inside ice." Tashira felt a strange warmth inside her chest. She had laughed at his primitive armor, at his human fragility. Now, watching him fight, she understood that true strength had nothing to do with equipment. It had everything to do with courage, willpower, and the heart to keep going when all seemed lost. At last, the Dralak leader appeared, a massive armored figure wielding a plasma hammer. The ground shook with each step. Soldiers trembled. Tashira's elite warriors readied themselves, but their weapons were no match for the sheer size and speed of the alien general. Daniel stepped forward. "Focus," he said quietly to the nearest soldiers. "Weak points, timing, work together." He dodged the general's first strike with incredible agility, using small movements that allowed him to avoid the massive hammer. Then he signaled the soldiers, who attacked the general from multiple angles, distracting it. Daniel seized the moment, firing a precise shot at a vulnerable joint. Sparks flew. The alien staggered. Tashira's breath caught. She had expected her empire's warriors to handle threats like this alone, but it was the human's mind and courage that made victory possible. The Dralak general fell, defeated not by technology, but by the combination of human strategy and Vereen bravery. The remaining drones retreated, leaving the battlefield quiet, save for the wind and the clatter of damaged armor. When the dust settled, the soldiers gathered around Daniel. He was exhausted, his armor battered but his spirit unbroken. He had faced impossible odds, saved lives, and turned defeat into triumph. Tashira approached him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she simply stared. Then slowly she knelt, a gesture of respect almost unheard of among the Vereen. "You have shown us what our own people could not see," she said softly. "We laughed at your armor, at your species, and we were wrong." Daniel shook his head slightly. "You never laughed at me again," he said with a small smile. "I did," she admitted, "but not after seeing you. Not after today." Her eyes glimmered with admiration and something deeper, an understanding that strength was more than armor, more than technology. It was heart, courage, and willpower, the same qualities that defined humanity. The Vereen Council, stunned into silence, could not deny what they had witnessed. The human had not only survived the storm, he had led them to victory. The soldiers who had once doubted him now called him Icebreaker, a title of respect that carried the weight of legend. Tashira turned to her people. We mocked the human's gear. We did not see the armor inside him, his courage, his will, his heart. These are stronger than any technology we possess. Her words spread like wildfire through the fortress. The soldiers cheered, honoring the human not as an outsider but as a warrior. Daniel stood quietly, letting the applause wash over him. He did not seek recognition. He did not seek glory. Yet he had earned it all, not by tools or enhancements, but by enduring, by adapting, and by refusing to surrender. Later, when the battle was over, Tashira and Daniel walked together on the observation platform. The wind had calmed again, and the frozen world glimmered under the pale sun. You could leave, Tashira said quietly. Return to your world. Daniel nodded. I will. But I leave knowing something important, that humans are capable of more than even I sometimes realize. She looked at him, a rare softness in her gaze. And you have taught us that strength comes in many forms. Not only weapons, not only shields, but the fire inside. He smiled faintly. That's humanity. Always has been. For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the horizon. The fortress behind them was safe, the soldiers alive, and a new respect between worlds had been born. Finally, Daniel turned toward his shuttle. Tashira bowed slightly, a gesture of deep respect, unusual for a princess of the Vereen Empire. Farewell, Icebreaker, she said. Farewell. Princess, he replied. As the shuttle lifted from the frozen ground, Tashira whispered to herself, almost as if confessing a secret. The warmth that survives ice is called humanity. She knew the legend of this human would be told for generations, not as a story of fragile beings, but as a story of courage, will, and honor, the traits that made humans truly extraordinary. The Vereen soldiers would never forget the night when a human showed them that true strength was not in the armor, but in the heart that wore it. And somewhere above the frozen fields of Varkesh, a human soldier looked back once, smiled, and felt the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. Not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. In that moment, two worlds had learned from each other. One had discovered humility, the other pride, and both had been changed forever.